Rain lashed against the window panes, blurring the outside world into an impressionist painting of grays and yellows. The relentless downpour seemed to echo the inner turmoil of those inside. Inside, the air hung thick with the aroma of roasted coffee beans and unspoken tension. The usually cozy atmosphere of the coffee shop felt heavy, almost suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in.
Tapping fingers impatiently. The rhythmic tapping of fingers on the wooden table was the only sound breaking the uneasy silence.
Alex tapped his fingers impatiently on the table, his gaze fixed on the swirling patterns in his latte. The intricate designs in the foam seemed to mock his inability to find clarity in his thoughts. Riley, seated opposite him, watched the rain. Her eyes followed the tiny rivers racing down the glass, each droplet a reflection of her own racing thoughts. Tiny rivers raced down the glass, mirroring the turmoil brewing within her. The rain outside was a stark contrast to the storm of emotions she felt inside.
You haven't touched your coffee. A voice broke the silence, gentle yet filled with concern.
She observed, her voice soft as the gentle patter of raindrops. The concern in her eyes was unmistakable, a silent plea for him to open up.
Does it matter? His voice was flat, almost defeated, as if he had already given up on finding answers.
Alex finally looked up, his eyes mirroring the stormy sky outside. The weight of his unspoken thoughts seemed to press down on him, making it hard to breathe.
It just seems unlike you. Her words were filled with a mix of confusion and concern, trying to understand the change in him.
Riley replied, carefully placing her hand over his. The warmth of her touch was meant to be comforting, a bridge to span the growing distance between them. He flinched at her touch. The sudden movement was a stark reminder of the emotional chasm that had formed between them, a gap that seemed to widen with each passing moment. The tension between them only grew thicker, like a storm cloud ready to burst. The air was heavy with unspoken words, and the silence between them was deafening. Every glance, every movement seemed to add to the growing storm.
Why are we even here, Riley? What are we trying to achieve with this conversation?
Alex asked, his voice barely a whisper. He leaned back, putting distance between them. The scent of his cologne, a familiar comfort, now felt suffocating. His eyes, once warm and inviting, now seemed distant and cold.
We're here because we need to talk. We haven't been ourselves lately. Something's changed and we need to figure out what it is.
And whose fault is that? You act like everything's fine when it's not.
Alex shot back, his voice sharp. He gestured vaguely between them, his frustration evident. The space between them felt like a chasm, impossible to bridge.
This intensity, it's suffocating. I can't breathe around you anymore.
Riley felt a familiar pang in her chest. The weight of their words pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe.
Intensity, is that what you call it? I call it passion, something we've lost.
She echoed, her voice barely audible. The words hung in the air, a fragile thread connecting them in their shared pain and confusion.
What else would you call it, Riley?
Alex challenged, his eyes burning with a desperate need for understanding. Or was it accusation? Riley couldn't tell anymore.
Passion, love.
She whispered, the word catching in her throat. Alex scoffed, the sound scraping against the silence of the coffee shop.
Love shouldn't feel like a cage, Riley.
Riley flinched as if he had struck her.
A cage? You think I'm trying to cage you?
A wide shot of the coffee shop highlighting the distance between Alex and Riley at their small table.
Aren't you? With your constant need for reassurance, your fear of everything?
And you, with your all-consuming fire, leaving nothing but ashes in its wake.
The cafe, once a haven from the storm outside, now mirrored the tempest raging between them. Other patrons glanced their way, their curious gazes adding to the stifling atmosphere.
Why are you doing this? Why are we doing this?
Riley, her anger dissipating as quickly as it had come, looked at him, her eyes filled with a deep sadness.
Because I love you, and loving you, it's like trying to hold on to a storm.
Alex stared at her, his face unreadable. He reached out, his fingers brushing against hers. For a moment, the cafe faded away, the rain outside silenced, and it was just the two of them. Two souls adrift in a sea of emotions.
What are we doing, Alex? Are we just going to sit here and pretend everything is fine?
Alex didn't answer. He couldn't. The weight of her question hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. The truth was, He didn't know. He was as lost as she was, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Did they dare weather the storms that raged within and around them? The tempest outside mirrored the turmoil in their hearts. Or was it time to seek shelter separately, preserving the memory of what they had before the winds of change blew it all away? The untouched cups of coffee between them were a silent testament to their indecision. He looked at Riley, at the woman who challenged him, infuriated him, and loved him with a fierce intensity that mirrored his own. The rain had stopped, but the storm within him raged on. A sliver of sunlight peeked through the clouds, casting a tentative ray of hope on the rain-washed street outside. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for them to find their way back to each other, to rebuild what the storm had tried to tear apart.